In an astonishing moment just 5 minutes ago, the world as we know it was obliterated. Sergei Lavrov, a pivotal figure, stood poised, gazing straight into the eyes of George Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy. It was as if time itself had frozen. Lavrov's presence commanded the room, nearly eclipsing all else. His upbringing in Europe had forged him into a shadowy figure, one who understood the unseen dimensions of power and politics. As the glass hall lit up, it reflected not just architectural elegance but also the layered sense of ambition and treachery pervading the air. Two distinct aromas, one representing leadership and the other, a bitter reminder of past failures, collided in this space. Lavrov, draped in a black suit, exuded the calm of a man who knew every fracture in the facade of diplomacy surrounding him. In stark contrast, Meloni, clad in a pristine white jacket, stood against the light like a newly raised flag. There was something unervingly clean about him, which only highlighted the grime of the battleground they stood upon. The stakes were razor-sharp. With a voice that could slice through the air, he proclaimed gratitude toward the United States, suggesting the dawn of a new political order, one where Europe would no longer remain in Russia's looming shadow. The applause erupted, reverberating in the hall as Meloni delivered his cutting speech. "The world no longer needs your old ways," he asserted defiantly. His voice rang with authority as he declared, "Europe speaks with its own voice now." After a dramatic pause, the tension crackled in the air, palpable enough to manifest itself. People exchanged glances, weighed by the gravity of his words. Amidst the stir, Lavrov remained stoic. Every fiber of his being seemed to absorb the hostility in the room. Rather than retaliate vocally, he summoned his formidable silence. His gaze cut through the crowd like a winter breeze, untouched by the chaos around him. "Your dependence on gas has surged to 18%, he stated, revealing profound truths as he revealed images of European streets gripped by economic turmoil and energy crisis. Lavrov illustrated the pain etched in the economy with visual proofs: deserted supermarkets, empty ATMs. The silence that followed felt like a heavy weight pressing against every soul present. "You believe you have gained freedom," he pressed on, "yet you pay dearly for it." Each word echoed, highlighting the stark contrast between idealism and reality. The tension was electric as Lavrov pointed to his own history. In 1945, we brought the world to its knees not for gain but for memory. The haunting images of the past appeared on the screens, Soviet engineers working to rebuild the shattered remnants of Europe. By resurrecting history, he exposed the scars left behind by so-called liberation. "We build bridges, not walls," Lavrov concluded, a firm assertion that reverberated across the hall. The realization settled like fog on a chilly morning: this was more than just a political exchange, it was a reckoning. As he finished, he made eye contact with Meloni, a silent challenge, an acknowledgement that the game was just beginning. In that moment, the question lingered: will Europe rise from its self-made debris, or will it remain trapped in a cycle of its own making? 5 minutes ago, the world as we knew it was shattered into chaos. Sergei Lavrov, a figure once rooted in this country, now stood in a new reality. With unwavering confidence, he fixed his gaze on Giorgia Meloni, the vibrant Prime Minister of Italy. Their impending confrontation promised to be explosive, heralding a shift in global dynamics. The tension in the air was palpable as the glass hall, crafted from not just design but symbolic meaning, transformed into a battleground. Within its mirrored walls, more than just security personnel and dignitaries gathered, the weight of history and the sense of power mingled. Lavrov, the personification of stoic diplomacy, remained seated like a chessmaster aware of every flaw in the board. His black suit and unyielding armor belied the regimented emotions beneath. On the other side, Meloni radiated a crisp authority in her stark white attire, illuminated by the unforgiving spotlight. It felt as if she stood before a canvas that demanded respect, their rivalry now playing out in front of an audience eager for tension and truth. The moment Meloni addressed the room, her voice sliced through the silence with precision. "We express gratitude to the United States for its decisive actions that have altered the landscape," she asserted. The audience erupted in applause, the sound echoing like a powerful wave. Yet, Meloni's words shifted as she directed her focus toward Lavrov's calm demeanor. "The era of enduring under your shadow is over," she declared, planting her flag of independence firmly into the ground. A long pause hung in the air, thick enough to sense the shift of power. Europe was asserting its voice, breaking free of constraints that had long held its progress hostage. But did Lavrov flinch? No. Instead, he maintained his composed silence, absorbing every whispered opinion, yet radiating an aura of cold conviction. Your dependence on gas has surged by 18%, he finally broke the ice, speaking with the weight of frigid determination, as he unveiled a graphic of stark economic reality on the screen. Images flashed before them, an empty supermarket, the last desperate figures at an ATM, streets that echoed with cries for warmth as temperatures plummeted. His words dripped with gravity, immersing the audience in a quiet dread, a stark reminder of the economic crisis looming over Europe. Your people understand that collapse is no mere metaphor, he continued, his voice resonating like a ghostly whisper, reminding everyone present of the harsh truths they could no longer ignore. As Lavrov continued, his cadence shifted into a rhythm that commanded attention. The audience was no longer passive spectators. They bore witness to a fierce exchange where data met emotion, revealing the raw underbelly of political maneuvering. Would Europe rise to reclaim its dignity, or would it stumble under the weight of its own choices? The next move in this geopolitical chess game awaited. Every figure in the room braced for the unfolding truth, knowing their fate hung precariously in this battle of ideologies. In a tense showdown on the world stage, the fate of nations hangs in the balance. The atmosphere crackles with electricity as the debate between diplomats intensifies, revealing deeper truths and hidden tensions. Sergei Lavrov, a figure shaped by a tumultuous past, faces off against Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. With striking visuals and potent rhetoric, the stakes don't just represent political alliances, they symbolize the struggle for identity and freedom. Moments earlier, Lavrov had transitioned the narrative sharply. He opened a tablet, revealing stark images of empty European streets. The plated figures seen in the shadows are reminders of the fragility of stability. Your people understand the real meaning of economic collapse, he declared, eyes narrowing as his voice pierced the charged silence. The room felt the weight of his words. Visuals displayed bare supermarket aisles and a single soul at an ATM, underscoring a grim reality. Freedom is indeed beautiful, Lavrov continued, his tone stirring dread amongst the onlookers, but it comes at a price, particularly when it concerns heating your homes. He then drew upon history. Images flickered of labor and sacrifice from the past. You remember 1945, he posited, invoking memories of a time marked by both hardship and resilience. Back then, supplies were shared not for profit, but for survival. And now, you've forgotten. The tension in the hall thickened, as he contrasted Europe's present determination with its storied past. You think you can advance by rejecting our shared heritage? Those who once opened doors are now content to build walls. Gasps filled the room, a potent blend of disbelief and discomfort. With steady conviction, he paused, voice resonating like a drum echoing through the silence, we choose our own path. Will you stand in the dark with the ghosts of your decisions? The air stilled, anticipation mounting. The audience, gripped by this stark ultimatum, barely dared to breathe. Did they truly grasp the significance of his vision? The power dynamics had shifted. As Lavrov leaned forward, the world braced itself. What would he unleash next? As the stage was set, both diplomats prepared for yet another round, but only one question lingered: was Europe prepared to confront the shadows of its past, or would it continue on a path destined for conflict and division? In the heart of a political arena, tension crackled like static electricity. As two formidable leaders faced off, the world held its breath. Just moments before, everything had changed. The balance of power hung by a thread. Sergei Lavrov, a figure of stoic diplomacy, cast a steady gaze at his rival, Georgian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who radiated an air of confident defiance. Meloni stepped into the spotlight, her white jacket stark against the backdrop of a turbulent world. The audience, a mixture of diplomats and officials, simmered with anticipation. Europe no longer thrives under your shadow, she declared, each word slicing through the air like a knife. A stunned silence enveloped the room, echoing her assertion. The old ways are dead. We will forge a new standard in international politics. The response was thunderous applause, but beyond the applause lay an unspoken war brewing. Lavrov remained composed, a granite figure amidst the storm. Without a flicker of emotion, he responded, under your policies, your gas dependence has surged by 18%. Europe is paying steeply for its misguided quest for freedom. With a sweep of his hand, he unveiled images on the screen: empty supermarkets and people clinging to their last euros, desperate faces lit by the harsh glare of reality. The atmosphere shifted palpably as Lavrov's voice rang clear: your people know the meaning of economic collapse. It's not just a metaphor. Eyes widened, hearts raced. Maloney's confidence wavered, yet she steeled herself, ready to retaliate. You can't intimidate us with statistics, she shot back. The fire in her voice picking up again. We have moved on, out of your reach. The hall crackled with tension. The stakes were high, and neither side would back down. Lavrov's gaze was piercing, high-stakes poker played with the gravitas of a historian recounting painful lessons. You build walls and call it progress, he rebutted, while we strive to build bridges. The audience felt the weight of his words like a heavy fog creeping in. Europe's past is riddled with destruction. Will you repeat history, or will you finally learn? As the debate escalated, Lavrov delivered a crushing blow. In 2 years, trade with the EU has plummeted by 47%. The room fell into silence, even Maloney faltered. His voice, calm as a winter's night, punctuated the air with a sobering truth, drawing the crowd in closer, each ear tuned to his every word. But who suffers more? It isn't us. It's you, he challenged, pulling up evidence that seemed to dance mockingly across the screen. You're merely purchasing alternatives, a shaky facade of independence. It's time to confront the truth, Prime Minister. Caught in a whirlwind of data and rhetoric, Maloney felt the ground shift beneath her. Lavrov continued, unfurling the consequences of betrayal, cultural exchanges lost, scientific collaboration severed. The silence that followed hung thick, oppressive, as the room collectively reeled. You've locked yourselves away, he stated, his voice piercing through the quiet, while we've opened our doors to innovation and opportunity. Yet you choose to ignore that reality. Is this the future you envision for your people? Maloney, resolute but visibly shaken, prepared for her final stand, sensing the crescendo rising. Would she rise to Lavrov's challenge, or would he clinically dismantle her every argument? The hall buzzed with anticipation, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken questions and palpable tension. What would be the outcome of this titanic clash? The battle lines were drawn, and the world watched with bated breath. Would this duel mark the dawn of a new era, or would the echoes of history reverberate once more? The atmosphere in the grand hall was electric, charged with tension and expectation. All eyes were on the two leaders at the forefront of a world torn apart, Sergei Lavrov, the seasoned diplomat, and Giorgia Meloni, the fierce Prime Minister of Italy. 5 minutes earlier, it felt as if the entire world was upended. As the two exchanged heated words, the weight of their statements reverberated off the walls. How had it come to this? Lavrov, with a calm demeanor, challenged Meloni's words. You speak of constructing walls, he asserted, the air thickening with each syllable. Meanwhile, we aim to build bridges. This statement echoed in the room, striking a chord somewhere deep within. The past weighed heavily, memories of a Europe rebuilt from the ashes of war flashed across screens, black and white images of Soviet sappers laboring in Berlin, the smoke rising from the ruins of Poland, the reconstruction efforts in Prague. These memories painted a stark contrast to the rhetoric of today. The room was still, only the sound of Lavrov's voice pierced the silence. You offer aid, yet it comes shackled in control. Is building a factory merely another form of oppression, he asked, displaying images of Soviet engineers in Bulgaria and medical aid distributed in Romania. The spectators were absorbed, their expressions revealing a growing discomfort with the truths unfolding before them. You choose what to remember, he continued, eyes locking onto Maloney's. The people fled, not just from hardship, but from you. His tone softened, but the impact grew sharper. You see only pain, while we measure the price. Caught in the weight of his words, the tension escalated, leaders exchanged nervous glances, the stakes rising higher with each comment. Then came the revelation, this is not merely about our nations, Lavrov declared, as realization dawned on those present. The issues at play transcended borders, they spoke to the core of humanity in crisis. Yet, in that moment of revelation came a chilling question, how far would they go to secure their national interests at the cost of genuine progress? Would this confrontation ignite a flame of hope or lead to further division? In those swirling emotions, the hall fell silent, understanding washing over the attendees. It was a truth they had to confront, a reckoning with the past that could alter their future. As Lavrov took his seat, he knew the struggle was far from over, he had merely opened the door to a deeper conversation, one that could reshape their fates. Would they walk through it together, or remain trapped in their respective shadows? The battle was only just beginning. In a world forever altered, 5 minutes ago, it all ended. Sergei Lavrov, a veteran of diplomatic discourse, grew up in a land built on complexities. As he scanned the room, he focused intently on Georgia Maloney, embodying both authority and defiance. The atmosphere thickened, a palpable tension hanging like smoke in the air. His silence was not just an absence, it was a statement. As he sat, a stoic figure draped in dark fabric, he seemed to sense every crack in the facade of this grand space. Maloney, dressed in a stark white blazer, stood as a stark contrast before him. The brightness of her attire clashed with the somber ambience, bringing forth questions: was the purity of her dress a facade? Behind that exterior, did she carry the weight of her country's past? Today, her words twisted in the air, slicing through the silence, her voice like steel ready to carve out a new narrative. Thank you to the United States for their leadership. Europe will no longer exist in your shadow, she declared, the hall erupting in applause. But Lavrov remained unmoved. With an icy calm, he weighed her words like stones, ready to throw back into the fray. He countered with calculated precision, layering facts upon the emotional rhetoric that swirled around them. The audience held its breath as he laid out the truth: your dependence has risen, and yet you claim to be free. His voice, steady yet resonant, told a story of economic frailty, numbers painting a vivid picture of reality: an empty supermarket, rising costs, a stark reminder of the consequences of choices made. Silence enveloped the room, heavy and weighty as Lavrov continued. He challenged their ideals of freedom, suggesting it was a service, a transaction. What does your freedom cost? He queried, digging deeper into their collective conscience. Murmurs filled the air, threads of doubt woven between the delegates, as they glanced between Lavrov and Maloney, the struggle of wills intertwined with the ghosts of their ancestors. As the room remained tense, Lavrov expertly maneuvered through the conflict. You believe you are building walls, while we construct bridges, he asserted, his voice rising and falling like a tide, each word crashing against the barriers erected by fear and misunderstanding. He conjured images of construction and destruction, reflections of history echoed in the minds of many, transporting them to times of crises long past. Maloney's resolve was palpable, but Lavrov's intelligence pierced through her arguments, revealing a deeper truth. You've chosen fear, rather than openness, he pronounced, his final words hanging in the air between them, a challenge to the entire room. The silence that followed was deafening. What truly lies beneath the surface of diplomacy? Can freedom ever exist without accountability? What sacrifices must peoples make for cohesion, when the cost is etched into memory and history? In the recent years, Europe has been rapidly shedding its traditions and memories, trading them for a facade of freedom. What once held profound meaning, symbols, history, and cultural identity, now feels hollow. Lavrov stumbled into the depths of this disillusionment when he faced a powerful opponent, Italy's Prime Minister Maloney. With every word exchanged, it became clear that this wasn't just a diplomatic squabble. It was a clash of ideals, a battle for the soul of Europe itself. As Lavrov began his speech, a palpable tension filled the room. The silence was like a thick fog, smothering any trace of comfort. He expressed how the facade of freedom can quickly turn into a service to control, evoking a mix of unease and disbelief in his audience. You call it modernization, he said, but you mean to enforce obedience. The unease intensified as he addressed the audience directly, suggesting that their concept of freedom serves to suffocate individual thought, family values, and religious beliefs. Maloney's response was unwavering. You claim to protect rights, but what do you protect us from? Fear, repression? Her voice cut through the tension like a knife, igniting echoes of past conflicts. The audience felt an ominous shift. Here was Maloney, adamant in her belief that Europe's future lay not in Lavrov's hands but in a courageous embrace of autonomy. But Lavrov was not done. He unleashed a volley of statistics: over 60% of Russians favor traditional family values, and more than 70% support the right to educate children within ideological frameworks. These numbers hung in the air like heavy weights. You think burning everything to forge a new identity is progress, he said, his tone steely. But that's merely an illusion. The unexpected twist came when he referred to the most alarming truth: the historical precedents where Europe had raised flags of unity before promptly abandoning them. The tension was electric, every attendee contemplating what lay ahead. Were they repeating a tragic cycle? Or could they embrace the future without severing ties with their past? The room became a battlefield of ideas. Who would emerge victorious from this escalating war of words? The clamor of doubt swirled around as both leaders stood firmly, unwavering. Would Maloney's vision of progress conquer Lavrov's deep-rooted traditions, or would the echoes of history bind Europe back to its storied past? As the silence fell once more, everyone sensed that a decision loomed, one that would shape the future in unforeseen ways. And thus, they found themselves poised on the brink of a monumental choice. What would the outcome be? The answers hang in the balance, waiting to reveal themselves in this ideological struggle, a struggle that extends beyond mere politics into the very fabric of identities, freedoms, and futures. In recent moments, an entire world lay in ruins. Among the remnants of civilization stood a man named Sergei Lavrov, a figure shaped by the land itself. His gaze pierced through the atmosphere, landing directly on his opponent, George Maloney, with a look so intense it felt like time had paused. The translator, often overlooked, was suddenly irrelevant in the face of this unbridled confrontation. Lavrov carried the weight of Europe's darkest histories, the shadows of unspoken truths loomed in a space stripped of filters and false comforts. As silence enveloped the hall, something remarkable occurred. A palpable tension hung in the air as Lavrov held his ground, exuding a calm confidence despite the chaos vibrating around him. Only moments ago, the world had shifted dramatically, and yet here he was, embodying authority amidst a storm of questions and judgments. The atmosphere thickened, an undeniable blend of fear, anger, and anticipation, while the bright lights above glinted off the polished surfaces, illuminating every face present. Flanked by precision microphones and rich emblems, Lavrov remained still, a statue amidst the turbulence. In stark contrast, Maloney, dressed in white, shimmered like a fresh canvas but lacked the resolve to match the stakes at hand. She projected an air of confidence, her voice ringing clear as she spoke of alliances and aspirations. "We must look forward," she proclaimed, rallying the troops, setting the stage for what seemed like a new order of politics where the past would no longer have a hold. But as she boldly asserted the fate of Europe under the United States' influence, the room erupted into resonance, a vibration of approval echoing against the walls, yet Lavrov silently calculated his response. He savored the moment, allowing the bubbling energy to build, forming a rising tide before the inevitable clash, a tempest brewing beneath the surface. And then it happened. Time seemed to stretch as he leaned forward, his voice a dense charge cutting through the air. "You speak of independence, but what of the dependency?" His words were heavy, each one dripping with the weight of statistics and facts that seemed to hang in the air like an impending storm. The thrill of his rebuttal electrified the audience. It was no longer just a debate, but a war of minds, ideologies in conflict. "Underneath your facade of freedom lies a different reality," he continued, as the numbers flashed before their eyes, the grim truths of rising gas dependencies that echoed across Eastern Europe and the palpable cost of this supposed independence. The silence that followed was deafening. "Your citizens know the meaning of economic collapse. It is no longer a metaphor." With each pulse of emotion, Lavrov ensured they felt the weight of his message, underscoring the tangible impacts of their actions. A silence punctuated by gasps bound them closer to the truth. "You've lost us," Lavrov declared again, each word resonating with historical gravity, each syllable a thrum against the backdrop of their shared past. It was at that moment, with the crunch of ice in the air and eyes wide with realization, the audience began to grasp the full impact of their choices, fate twisting in real time, a tension thick enough to cut with a knife. They were at the precipice of a new reality. Lavrov seized the moment. He waved on the screen, images appearing, statistics illuminating the stark decline of cultural exchange, a once thriving bridge reduced to mere memory. "You misunderstand the depth of our connection," he pressed, his voice rising. "You are choosing to forget." Each phrase dripped with urgency, and Lavrov pressed forth with the stories behind the slides that flickered before the assembly, tales of prosperity, shared experiences, lives woven together across borders now frayed by actions and ideologies. "You have closed your doors, exchanged cultural richness for division. The freezing silence in your abandoned halls echoes louder than any applause." In that solemnity, Lavrov, the seasoned diplomat, wove a narrative that ignited more than simple retaliation. He lit a fire of deep reflection and introspection among those present. The room hungered for acknowledgement of their past, where bridges had once been built rather than walls erected, where collaboration was favored over confrontation. But amid the heated debate, a realization dawned on Maloney that Europe did not require the specter of Russia, yet the taste of triumph felt bitter. The audience shifted restlessly, caught between the ideal and the reality, their hearts racing with questions yet unanswered. What did a world without these connections truly mean? Would they find themselves better off, or would they only spiral into isolation? A decision that reverberated through history? As Lavrov stood resolute, the tides were shifting, and the future held a host of unpredictable outcomes, all entwined with the fabric of today's ideological clashes. In this gripping narrative, we find ourselves at the epicenter of a charged diplomatic confrontation. Just moments ago, the world seemed to unravel, and in this chaotic backdrop, Sergei Lavrov found himself face-to-face with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. The atmosphere was thick with tension, held together by unspoken challenges and the weight of history. As Lavrov eyed Meloni, a profound silence enveloped the room, capturing the gravity of their discourse. The hall was a spectacle in itself, a structure born not just of brick and mortar but of memories and fragrances, reverberating with echoing voices of the past. It was a meeting not merely of politicians but of ideologies, where the air crackled with anticipation. Inside, Lavrov observed his surroundings like a detective scouring a crime scene, aware of every detail. Dressed in a somber black suit that reflected both authority and resolve, he prepared to launch his counter-arguments. Opposite him stood Meloni, clad in a stark white jacket, a beacon amidst the undercurrents of political grime. Her demeanor radiated assertiveness, an image of classical Italian style juxtaposed against the intensity of the discussion. As she opened her mouth to speak, her voice cut through the air like a blade. "We thank our allies for their unwavering support," she proclaimed, resonating confidence. But her words had deeper resonance, hinting at an emerging Europe shedding the vestiges of dependence. "The old shadows are fading, and we will no longer be held hostage to your decisions," she asserted, practically daring Lavrov to respond. A deafening silence followed her declaration, a palpable pause heavy with unspoken repercussions. But Lavrov remained unflinching, an immovable rock amidst the storm. Slowly, he raised his voice, each word crafted with surgical precision. "Your dependence is stark," he said, presenting undeniable statistics. "Over the last year, energy reliance has soared. 18% increase among your nations." Images flashed on the screen, scenes of desolation that drove his point home, empty shelves, streets deserted in despair. As his words took flight, a memory flickered, remnants of a past where cooperation thrived, landmarks rebuilt from the ashes of war. Lavrov continued, his voice steady, "You chose isolation, erected walls disguised as bridges." The crowd buzzed with realization. His rebuttals prompted thoughts of shared history, recalling moments when hope prevailed over animosity, when bridges were genuinely built. Meloni reacted, her facade wavering slightly, the pressure mounted. "You claim we've lost our way, yet it is you who mourns the past," she quipped back, hope lurking in the undertones of her defiance. But Lavrov was relentless. "What you perceive as progress is a retreat into shadows," he countered, a slight smirk creeping across his lips as he pondered the convoluted undercurrents of their meeting. And so the match continued, words exchanged like bullets, each with a weighty backstory. The room erupted into waves of murmurs as Lavrov alighted upon the crux of their feud. Cultural exchanges stifled, friendships eroded. Behind his calm exterior was a tempest brewing, aimed to dismantle Meloni's narrative of progress. "Italy's industries will bear the cost of this isolation," he warned, surpassing rhetoric with data. Trade between their nations dwindled severely, a stark 70% drop. As he finished, the crowd sat entranced, alive to the realization that this fierce exchange was not merely about two nations but of futures hanging in the balance. Who would emerge victorious? The sound of silence weighed heavily as thoughts of collaboration and conflict danced in the air, as vivid and irrefutable as the emotions behind every charged word. How would history remember this moment? Would it be a chance for reconciliation or further estrangement? The future remained uncertain, a blank canvas ready to be painted with the strokes of fate. In a world turned upside down, where chaos reigns, a powerful exchange unfolds between two iconic figures. The tension electrifies the air as Sergei Lavrov, steeped in the weight of past glories, faces off against Italy's Giorgia Meloni, a beacon of progressive rhetoric. What happens when tradition collides with modernity? Just moments ago, the stage was set. The atmosphere in the Grand Chamber, filled with diplomats and dignitaries, buzzed with anticipation. Sergei Lavrov casts a long shadow, embodying centuries of history, unwavering in the face of shifting allegiances. And yet, as he locks eyes with Meloni, a stirring confrontation begins. Meloni initiates the duel, draped in a pristine white coat, a stark contrast to the shadows of the past. "The world cannot dwell in memories," she asserts, her voice unwavering. Europe must forge a new identity, no longer masked by your lingering influence. The applause cascades through the hall, a tangible declaration that the old guard's days are numbered. And Lavrov, unfazed, countered not with rhetoric but with chilling facts. Under the facade of your freedom, he states, each word heavy, the dependence on foreign gas has skyrocketed an 18% increase, while your citizens face soaring costs at the supermarket. He clicks through slides, revealing stark images of desolation, empty shelves, a lone soul at an ATM, the desperation palpable. He leans into the silence that follows, you forsake progress for pride. And the result? He pauses dramatically before revealing a heart-wrenching truth, your people suffer. The gasps ripple across the room, the reality strikes a chord deeper than mere statistics. But Maloney is not one to back down so easily. Your shadows loom large, but do they provide shelter, or merely perpetuate suffering? Her voice rings with determination. The hall holds its breath as the battle escalates, facts flying like arrows, each intent on piercing the other's arguments. Lavrov, now more like a seasoned maestro than a mere diplomat, stares down the cries of contradiction. Look closely. He gestures to the screen behind him, intertwined tales of lost livelihoods and a common past from which Europe has chosen to distance itself. You abandon dialogue and choose division. As the room simmers with anticipation, Maloney's resolve falters, she knows the stakes. She glances at Lavrov, recognition flickers, and with a slow exhale, she prepares for one final argument. But Lavrov, with unshakable calm, finds his moment to strike once more. With the crowd hanging on his every word, he declares, while you build walls, we will construct bridges. The imagery resonates, the very bones of history scream for attention. It's not just a conflict of nations, it's a clash of ideologies, and the future hangs in the balance. Now, will Maloney muster the strength to defy tradition, or will Lavrov's haunting echoes of the past secure his grip on the stage? The tension is palpable, and the answer remains uncertain. What will the next act hold in this profound drama where words become weapons? And truth itself is on trial? In an arena echoing with historical weight, the stages are set and the final moves remain to be played. What will be the outcome in this fierce game of diplomacy? The world is watching, and the clock is ticking. 5 minutes ago, everything changed. The world as we knew it was shattered to pieces. In the center of this turmoil stood Sergei Lavrov, a man shaped by the very land he once called home. As he locked eyes with George Maloney, the Italian Prime Minister, the tension became palpable, arresting attention like an electrifying storm approaching. Their encounter promised to unravel everything. The assembly hall sparkled under the harsh lights, its glass walls reflecting the myriad emotions swirling within. It was a stage built not merely from concrete but imbued with the weight of history and the lingering aroma of unspoken truths. In this moment, Lavrov was not just representing his country, he embodied a heavy legacy marked by conflict and resilience. Seated like a sentinel, Lavrov understood the cracks within the structure surrounding him, the relations, the mistrust, a diplomatic minefield sprawled before him. Opposite him, with an immaculate white jacket that stood out strikingly against the backdrop of power, Maloney rose to her feet. Her voice was a melodic warrior's call, proclaiming gratitude to the United States for their solidarity and their unyielding stance on international matters. But her words were laced with a poignant challenge that pierced through the applause. The old shadows of your regime are no longer applicable to a modern Europe, she declared, her eyes narrowing as she faced Lavrov, who remained stoic. Could she indeed silence an era, or was she merely evoking the ghosts of a past that was anything but gone? The crowd fell into insistent whispers. Lavrov didn't shift, he simply leaned into the argument. He spoke, his voice deep and resonant, filled with a mix of obligation and disdain. You fail to see the truth, he countered, highlighting the rising gas dependence in Europe, numbers splashing across the screens like neon stakes of reality. With a deep breath, he displayed images, a haunting slideshow of empty supermarket shelves, deserted ATMs, and desperation echoing across European streets. He delivered fact after fact, each one more staggering than the last. Your economy is crumbling. You cling to the illusion of independence while spiraling into chaos, he said, his voice a thick blanket of conviction that weighed heavily on his audience. Silence enveloped the hall, as disbelief mixed with fear became the backdrop to the unfolding narrative. You built walls, he continued, challenging the very foundation of Maloney's rhetoric. We build bridges. Suddenly, the atmosphere thickened, the air crackling with uncertainty. The image of black and white footage from a post-war Europe filled the screen, Soviet engineers laboring shoulder to shoulder with the rubble of cities once destroyed. Yet, as Lavrov painted his picture of history, it became painfully clear that each word was not merely a rebuttal, but a declaration of intent. He questioned the very identity of the gathering. Who were they to judge? The room vibrated with the memory of decisions made and lives altered, laid stark against the fight for autonomy. As Lavrov paused, the weight of history pressed into the silence. Are we yet again destined to repeat the mistakes of our forebears? Have we forgotten what true collaboration means? In that moment, the crowd teetered on the edge. Who would emerge as the true victor in this war of narratives, this clash of convictions? The tension escalated, and the question lingered in the air like a gun awaiting a trigger. What would happen when the veneer of unity cracked, when the realms of diplomacy lay bare, each side refusing to retract? The stage was set for an explosive confrontation that could redefine alliances and ignite flames of conflict anew. The world watched, breath held, as the echoes of past and present danced dangerously close to a precipice that could plunge everything into chaos. In a world just 5 minutes after its destruction, two powerhouses face each other. On one side sits Sergei Lavrov, a figure sculpted by a history that looms large. Across from him stands Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, impeccably dressed, radiating a sense of urgency and authority. Their words echo in a glass chamber that seems to capture the essence of an era on the brink. As Meloni speaks, the air grows thick with tension. She asserts Europe's rebirth from beneath the shadow of war. But what happens when history attempts to repeat itself? Has Europe truly cut its ties to the past? Meloni's voice rises, commending the United States as the font of transformation. The Lavrov's steady demeanor reveals a man preparing to wield more than just words. His silence carries weight, a strong undercurrent that belies the calm exterior. You think you are free, he intones, his voice resonating like thunder in a storm. Remember the price of that freedom. With a click, Lavrov projects stark images onto the screen, barren supermarkets and families struggling to survive. He highlights stark statistics. Trade between Russia and the European Union has plummeted by nearly 50% in the past 2 years. This isn't merely a replay, it's a wake-up call echoing from the past to confront the present. The audience is struck silent, grappling with the gravity of his message. You call this independence, he challenges, each word a carefully wielded weapon aiming for the heart of Meloni's rhetoric. You build walls while we aspire to create bridges. What do your choices truly cost? He steps forward, piercing through the veil of diplomacy. His words hang heavy in the air, evoking memories of destruction, the ruins of a war-torn continent. But Meloni is not one to bow easily. You speak of history, but we are forging a new path, she counters, her resolve unwavering. Yet deep down, both know the stakes are immeasurable. Trust and betrayal lay a hair's breadth apart, a fragile dichotomy at the mercy of their whims. As tensions rise, the fate of Europe, and perhaps the world, rests precariously on a knife's edge. What truths will emerge from this clash? Old grudges, new alliances, or debts that can never be repaid? The world watches as the echoes of the past bleed into a future uncharted, waiting for the final word that could shift the balance of power forever. In a world shattered just moments ago, the atmosphere hung heavy with tension as two powerful figures prepared to face off. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian diplomat, sat poised, embodying calm amidst chaos. His glare pierced through to Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister, manifesting an unyielding resolve. Lavrov's presence was magnetic, yet foreboding. He was a man forged in shadows, embodying the weight of history and the echoes of past conflicts. The hall, a cavern of heavy silence, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash of ideologies. Suddenly, Meloni broke the silence with a proclamation so bold, it felt like a gust of chill wind. She declared the end of an era dominated by Russia's influence, her white jacket shining like a new flag against the gray backdrop of tension. Europe will no longer live under your shadow, she asserted. A spark ignited in the audience, applause reverberating like gunfire. Yet in Lavrov's steady gaze, he revealed no emotion, his silence a storm brewing underneath. Then, utterly unfazed, Lavrov countered with brutal truths. Your dependence on gas has soared by 18%, he stated coolly, unfurling images of fraught European streets. The room filled with a sound palpable enough to touch, the rustle of papers, stifled gasps, as tension thickened in the air. Your people are feeling the economic collapse firsthand, he continued. He presented stark images of empty supermarkets, desperate citizens, and faltering banks, facts that weaved a reality too evident to dismiss. This isn't just rhetoric, Lavrov pressed. His voice dense and steady as snowfall, enveloping everyone in a chilling truth. He questioned Maloney, his words slicing through her bravado like a blade. Are you truly ready to turn your back on history, on progress, on trust? In the escalating war of narratives, an unexpected shift occurred. Maloney regained her footing, reigniting her defiance. You have long clung to power through control and manipulation, but we've chosen freedom, she shot back. It was a mantra that resonated beneath the hardened facade of diplomacy. Yet, Lavrov remained unmoved, like an ancient oak, deeply rooted in his convictions. As the exchange wore on, the temperature in the room shifted dramatically. Lavrov, no longer just a voice, became a figure haunted by the memories inscribed in his nation's soul. You may call it progress, he murmured, eyes narrowing slightly, but it seems to shroud your judgment. The audience, inhaling the charged atmosphere, sensed the shifting tides. Maloney's steadfastness began to fracture under the weight of Lavrov's assertions. What was meant to be a display of resolve became an exploration of uncomfortable truths, as both leaders found themselves entangled in a web of historical grievances and existential realities. The climactic moments plunged into a silence so profound it felt eternal. Who would emerge victorious in this high-stakes dance? The battle between past mistakes and future aspirations gripped the hall, a confrontation not merely of states but of the very essence of belief and identity. With each word exchanged, the air buzzed with anticipation. And the room was alive with the specter of history. Would the echoes of the past drown their hope for a new beginning? The world held its breath, caught in the crossfire of ideals and the undying quest for power. 5 minutes ago, everything changed in an instant. The world as we knew it crumbled, leaving a surreal silence in its wake. In the grand arena of diplomacy, one figure rose above all, the seasoned Sergei Lavrov. With a gaze piercing enough to shatter illusions, he faced off against Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, a showdown charged with tension. In the immense hall filled with whispers and the faint scent of stale coffee, Lavrov stood like a statue, perfectly composed beneath an unyielding black suit. He had become a master of the political chessboard, every twitch of his expression a calculated move. Across from him, Meloni in her stark white blazer resembled a freshly washed flag waving in a storm, too pristine, too bold for the battlefield they occupied. Does Europe need Russia anymore? Meloni's voice sliced through the air, challenging the status quo. The room erupted with applause, a wave of approval crashing at her feet. But Lavrov remained unperturbed, as if untouched by the flurry around him. The silence he commanded was as heavy as the weight of history itself. Under our shadow, you used to feel secure, now, you tremble, he countered, his tone cold, as if made of stone. A ripple of gasps swept through the audience. As he unfolded the harsh realities of dependence, energy shortfalls, economic decay, his words painted vivid images of vacant stores and lines of despair outside ATMs. The European spirit, heralded as free, was intertwined with chains forged in ignorance. Meloni paused, her confidence wavering as the truth hit hard. The numbers were stark, a staggering rise in gas dependency, skyrocketing costs, and failures of promises made. For every placard she wielded against the old orders, Lavrov had facts enough to unravel her facade. Each statistic pierced the air like arrows as he displayed images of once vibrant streets now echoing with the silence of abandoned dreams. And then came the unthinkable. Lavrov summoned the ghosts of the past, showing images of resilient nations, a tapestry of grief and strength woven together. You choose what to remember and what to forget, he declared, his voice resonating like a war drum. The hall fell into a hush, faces reflecting unease, incredulity, and, as Lavrov turned to her, discomfort. Would Europe choose reflection or isolation? In that heartbeat of silence, futures hung in the balance. Would they heed his warning or continue to dance across the precipice of economic folly? The tension crackled like electricity, one remark away from either redemption or disaster. This was just the beginning. The stage was set, and the stakes were high. The question loomed large, in an era of divided alliances, who would emerge as the true leader of the global stage? In a high-stakes meeting where the fate of nations hangs in the balance, the tension was palpable. Just moments before, the world as we know it seemed to have been shattered. Sergei Lavrov, a stalwart figure of diplomacy, now faced the fiery rhetoric of Giorgia Meloni, the bold Prime Minister of Italy. The two leaders embodied contrasting philosophies and ideals, setting the stage for a clash that would echo beyond the walls of this gathering. With steely resolve, Lavrov fixed his gaze on Maloney, his confidence undeterred. He had grown up amidst the shadows of Europe, a witness to its historical shifts, yet here he was, scrutinizing Maloney as if her every word was a fragile glass ornament, waiting to be shattered. The atmosphere thickened, heavy with expectation, and the scent of freshly polished wood mingled with nervous perspiration. Maloney, donned in a crisp white blazer, radiated an aura of determination. Against the backdrop of this carefully curated space, her presence was striking. "We thank the United States for their decisive actions," she intoned, her voice cutting through the air with the sharpness of a blade. The audience erupted in applause, laughter ringing out, yet Lavrov remained unmoved, like a granite statue in the storm. As Maloney pressed forward, her rhetoric gained momentum. "Europe no longer requires the old shadows of the past," she declared, her words echoing off the walls, each one a calculated strike directed at Lavrov. The applause swelled, but the gravity of her statement hung in the air like a weight threatening to collapse under its own significance. The hall fell into a hushed silence as the magnitude of her implications settled over the attendees. In response, Lavrov's voice emerged like a storm brewing over a calm sea. "Surely, you realize," he began, "that sacrificing market and technology only punishes your own people." The crowd stilled, a jolt of realization rippling through the audience. His pointed remarks echoed deep feelings of vulnerability and defiance. To claim independence while shooting through the walls of your neighbor only invites catastrophe. His pause was a crack of thunder. He painted imagery of past miscalculations, pulling up photos of historical events, the liberation of Bulgaria by the Red Army, the victories of Yugoslav partisans. "Your narrative may eclipse the truth, yet history is relentless," he declared, his voice steady and filled with the weight of time. "You call our actions tyranny, but what was once liberation may not be seen as heroism for you." His words carved through the tension like a knife. Absorbing the unfolding conflict, the audience sat on the edge of their seats. Maloney's stance seemed to falter, just for a moment, as Lavrov unleashed statistics that countered her narrative. "The trade between Russia and the European Union has plummeted by 47%, he said, lingering on each number, drawing gasps of disbelief. "It is Europe that bears the loss. Not us." Lavrov stepped forward into the light, emphasizing the importance of dialogue and shared history over division and isolation. His assertions twisted like a tightening noose around the room, striking a chord of fear and revelation. The visuals projected behind him images of wartime struggles and resilience etched a story of survival, hope, and the haunting shadows of occupation. With each carefully chosen word, he challenged the audience's preconceived notions. To vilify and build walls is to forget the principles of connection, he emphasized, his voice rising above the murmurs. "What are we becoming if we only remember pain and discrimination?" His gaze swept across the room, landing on thoughtful faces, some contemplating, others disturbed. As he finished, a charged silence engulfed the hall, the tension palpable. The atmosphere crackled with energy as if an unseen force bound them in an unending stare-off. The weight of their history pressed heavily on their shoulders, and yet a single question loomed: was this truly the end of diplomatic endeavors or merely the beginning of an unexpected alliance? The stage was set for more than just a confrontation, but a clash of ideologies that would reshape the course of nations. As the meeting reached a critical juncture, an unsettling reality began to unfurl. Would clarity prevail, or would darkness reign as the decisions of today echoed into the future? In a stunning turn of events, a world once thriving now lay in ruins just moments before. As the dust settled, Sergei Lavrov, a towering figure in international diplomacy, locked eyes with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. The tension was palpable, as if time itself had frozen. Little did they know, their encounter would echo through the corridors of power, shaking the very foundations of global politics. A gathering of powerful leaders filled the majestic hall, but the air was thick with anticipation and unspoken fears. Lavrov seemed to embody the weight of history as he sat, somehow both immovable and ready to strike. His presence commanded respect, a quiet storm dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. Opposite him, Meloni radiated a stark brightness in her crisp white jacket, her outlook marked not just by optimism but a fierce determination to reshape the narrative. She began her address, voicing gratitude towards the United States for their unwavering support, an important beacon in troubling times. Yet, with each word, she made it clear that Europe's gaze would no longer be shadowed by Lavrov's past. The hall erupted with applause, but it was no ordinary applause, it felt like an electric calling, a rallying cry for a new era. But just as the applause echoed through the chamber, Lavrov's turn approached. He rose slowly, each movement deliberate. With an assurance that held the room captive, he challenged the very foundations of Maloney's rhetoric. Under our shadow, you felt warmth. But now? His voice reverberated, dense and calculated, cutting through the noise. Laughter rippled through the audience, punctuating the tension. With a flick of his wrist, Lavrov brought to life images from the past. Streets filled with despair and cold, symbols of shattered economies and hopes dashed against the rocks of political ambition. Your dependency on external energy has surged. Do your people know the price of freedom? His words hung heavy in the air as the audience absorbed the gravity of the situation. Each slide told a story of struggle, long grocery lines, empty wallets, fingers trembling over dwindling savings. The grim reality was undeniable, as Lavrov illuminated economic fractures that exposed the harsh truths hidden beneath the surface of political speeches. Then came the twist that would rattle Maloney's composure. Lavrov revealed sobering statistics, trading barbs that intertwined data with emotional resonance. Over 1.3 million Soviet soldiers sacrificed for what? A chance for dignity and a space to honor the gods of your choosing? His voice boomed, resonating with memories that needed no embellishment. Murmurs spread through the audience as Lavrov pressed forward, unearthing historical grievances masked as modern-day politics. You've drawn lines, built walls, celebrated exclusions, yet forgotten the bonds that could unite us. He gestured emphatically to a map illustrating where alliances could have flourished instead of territorial decrees. Lavrov's perspective shifted from accusatory to revealing. He was no longer just a diplomat but a spectral witness to history's grand narratives. To remember is to confront, he stated, leaving Maloney and the assembly to ponder their own legacies and choices. With the final words lingering in the air, silence fell, tense and contemplative. Would history repeat itself, or could a new vision emerge from this impasse? Only time would tell as alliances reshaped before their very eyes, transforming the geopolitical landscape forever. 5 minutes ago, everything as we knew it shattered. In an assembly hall awash with tension, Sergei Lavrov transformed the air. As he locked eyes with Georgia Maloney, it felt as if time itself paused. The room held its breath, navigating the boundary of public discourse and raw confrontation. Lavrov, a seasoned diplomat, stood steadfast, cloaked in indifference while the world around him teetered on the cusp of chaos. In hues of black and white, Lavrov radiated authority, untouched by the whispers of the hall. In stark contrast stood Maloney, bright and sharp in her white jacket, a flag waving fiercely against the oppressive weight of silence. She represented a new Europe, one eager to break free from the shadow of the past. This is the time for a new standard of international politics, her voice sliced through the thick air, eliciting a crescendo of applause that echoed off the walls. You think you can dictate terms from the past? Lavrov countered, his words deliberate and heavy, laden with the memories of histories twisted by conflict. He gauged the room, sensing an electric shift as he mentioned the soaring costs of energy dependence, casting vivid images of empty supermarket shelves and desperate citizens trading their last possessions. The room fell silent, the truth of his claims sitting heavily in the air like a thick fog. Suddenly, Lavrov brought forth a photo, capturing the stark reality of European streets in turmoil, where warmth was a luxury many could barely grasp. This is not a metaphor. Your people know the pain well. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. To him, this wasn't mere rhetoric, it was the raw aftermath of choices made in the name of progress. A flashback danced in Lavrov's mind. He recalled the cries of citizens during darker times, running from oppression not merely across borders, but from a very ideology they once embraced. It was a haunting melody that resonated deep within his core. The two leaders were locked in an emotional chess game, pushing boundaries, revealing vulnerabilities, yet neither willing to concede. Maloney, now visibly shaken, saw the cracks in her facade deepen. You've pushed us away, she remarked, her voice a staccato of urgency. She struggled to maintain her stance, realizing that words alone could no longer shield her from the unraveling truths. As Lavrov leaned forward, calmly punctuating the air with righteous indignation, he exposed the fragility of her arguments against the hard backdrop of cold, hard facts. You flourish in the safety of numbers and political structures we've built, yet you dare to cast us aside? The room swelled with uncertainty, the stakes climbing higher with each moment. Could Maloney withstand this relentless barrage of truths? As the silence deepened, their words became weapons, minds shifted, and the audience, entangled in the tension, awaited the next move that would dictate the dialogue of nations. The question lingered: who would waver first in this compelling war of memory and ideology? In a world on the brink of division, all eyes remained expectantly glued to these two titans. What would unfold next, as they grappled not merely with one another, but with a legacy of conflict that shaped their very identities? Each flicker of emotion, every tremble of conviction, became a point of no return, igniting a fire destined to reshape the future. Continuing from the biting exchange, where Lavrov dismantled Maloney's accusations piece by piece, exposing Europe's crumbling facade, the hall hung on every word like fragile glass ready to shatter. Imagine a world uprising against one woman's arrogance, where ancient builders from Africa and Asia reclaimed their place in history. Could Lavrov's pointed gesture ignite a global reckoning? The air thickened with unspoken tensions, sharp cologne clashing against the scent of polished wood and uneasy sweat, as he rose deliberately, like a master strategist watching empires fall in slow motion. He gazed directly at Maloney, the one who'd locked Europe behind its own bars. Lavrov spoke softly, his words sinking in like icy rain on hot skin. "You label us isolated," he murmured. "But who really flips the scripts? Who shutters the flow of knowledge and art? Who silences our symphonies in your so-called enlightened corners? Tchaikovsky festivals vanish. Russian lit courses dissolve at universities. Our language fades from school walls. This isn't our exile, it's yours from us." A sly grin touched his lips, eyes piercing like a distant storm. "You're not terrified of walls we build, you're quaking because we blossom beyond your reach." He leaned forward. "Feel that chill creeping up your spines?" The screen flickered to life, numbers blazing like neon warnings in the dim room. BRICS summit pulsed with power, 22 nations uniting. Economics in steady grip. Energy deals soaring, our companies fueling the boom. Africa stirred. Latin America awakened. Middle East connections deepened. We cooperate freely. We expand horizons. Not trapped in cages, just refusing your narrow paths. Laughter rippled through the crowd, mocking Maloney's frozen facade. Some shifted uncomfortably, whispers grating like nails on chalkboards. Lavrov advanced to the screen. "Behold the world map, trade currents surging. South Africa's rise. Latin America's bloom. Real growth, no illusions. As you constrict, we widen. As you slam doors, we open bridges. Wide." Maloney's face betrayed her fury, cheeks flushing like bruised fruit, breath ragged against the stifling air. She scribbled furiously, but her eyes darted like a cornered fox. She wasn't responding today, she was enduring the heat. Yet the weight of his facts pressed down, heavier than unspoken regrets, leaving everyone wondering, if Maloney blinks first, will Europe's empire truly crumble under the weight of its own lies? Or will she unleash a retaliation that burns even brighter, exposing generations of concealed shame? The auditorium's hum faded to silence, anticipation coiling like a serpent ready to strike. 5 minutes ago, the world as we knew it vanished in a blaze. Words echoed through the air as Sergei Lavrov, a master of diplomacy, stood before George Maloney, the Prime Minister of Italy. What transpired next reverberated through history, a clash not just of words, but of ideals. Imagine the tension in that glass hall, filled with representatives from around the globe, each breath suspenseful, as the air thickened with anticipation. Did you ever think the stakes of diplomacy could be this high? In hushed tones, Lavrov stared down Maloney, the shadows of past glories encapsulated in his dark suit, an unyielding presence. He was the epitome of composure. Against him, Maloney appeared vibrant but unervingly clean, like a newly washed flag poised for battle. The bright lights could barely contain the weight of their exchange. "Our alliance with the United States is strong. We will not fall into the shadows anymore," Maloney declared, his voice resonating with resolve. Applause filled the hall, but it was not without its ominous undertones. The energy in the room shifted, revealing an unspoken rivalry. As he spoke, Lavrov merely remained seated, the silence stretching, pulling the tension taut. Was it confidence or defiance that kept him still? The moment crackled as Lavrov finally broke his silence, a deep, chilling voice floated over the applause. "You trust in dependency? Your gas dependence has risen to 18%. What is the price of your so-called freedom? He revealed powerful images on the screen, showing empty supermarket shelves, dimly lit streets and a looming crisis, the echo of history ringing ominously in each word. Confrontation was his weapon. Did you think history wouldn't remember? With each chilling statistic, Lavrov dismantled Maloney's bravado. Economic collapse is no longer a metaphor for your people. It's a reality. The hall fell into a deafening silence. He illustrated a stark truth: you think you're free, but are you really? In that moment, the air felt heavy, thick with disbelief and awakening. Lavrov's words painted a picture that was hard to ignore. You think this is about Russia and Italy? No, this is about the choices you make as a civilization. His voice, calm yet unwavering, cut through the thick veneer of political propriety. Maloney faced the audience, visibly shaken but still grounded. Europe needs to distance itself from the shadows of the past. A bold statement, yet would her bravery hold? With every word exchanged, the line between ally and opponent blurred, a chess game where the stakes were freedom, survival, and power. In this intense exchange, underneath layers of diplomacy, a deeper conflict simmered. Could Maloney truly be the voice of a new Europe, or was it merely a facade? As the debate raged, an unexpected twist loomed: a call to reclaim identity amidst the chaos. The conversation pushed and pulled, like a tempest, but would either truly emerge victorious, or would they tear each other apart? The audience, a sea of witnesses now caught in an emotional ebb and tide, held their breath, knowing they were witnessing history in the making. The finale awaited. And the question lingered: who would come out unscathed when the dust settled? In a world torn apart mere minutes ago, a tense confrontation unfolds. Sergei Lavrov, a figure steeped in shadows, prepares for a showdown with Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. Both leaders stand at opposite ends of a glass hall that echoes with unspoken tensions. Lavrov, draped in a sharp black suit, embodies stoicism. Meloni, radiant in her white jacket, symbolizes a new era of European resolve. The air is thick with anticipation, yet neither seems ready to yield. As Meloni takes the stage, she boldly proclaims a future free from Russia's dominance. Europe no longer lives in your shadow, she declares. The audience erupts into applause, yet the air crackles as Lavrov remains unfazed, his silence a powerful counterpoint. What does it mean for a continent to stand united against a legacy of might? As he finally speaks, his words cut through the applause like a knife. Under our shadow, you sought warmth. Now, you simply freeze. Images flash on the screen behind him: empty supermarkets, people scrambling for resources, and the stark reality of economic collapse. The stark conditions are not metaphorical. Your dependency on our gas has surged. Are you prepared to pay the price? He challenges. The silence that follows is unsettling, almost questioning. What happens when reliance morphs into desperation? As the tension mounts, Lavrov unveils a map showcasing economic statistics. Trade between Europe and Russia is dwindling. In 2 years, your trade levels with us plummeted by nearly half. Was this progress or folly? His voice, steady and unwavering, invites reflection. The drama heightens as Meloni counters, immersing the audience within the heart of Italian pride and ethical rigor by asserting, "We've moved beyond your games." Her confidence electrifies the room, yet Lavrov's response is chilling. You've only exchanged one old master for another. You build walls masquerading as diplomacy. And just as a gasp ripples through the crowd, he continues, we offered bridges. But now, those bridges are being burned. The hall breathes in the historical weight of his words. Could this be the beginning of an unraveling? As Lavrov claims the stage, he reveals a history of cooperation lost, Soviet engineers aiding in rebuilding efforts post-conflict, a gesture long forgotten by a Europe that chooses to ignore its past. The documents speak of goodwill, not dominance. You would call this investment if it came from elsewhere. The room falls into a reflective hush. What does it mean to be remembered? What does freedom truly cost? And in the lingering silence, with senses heightened, every anecdote shared connects to a larger narrative, questioning the true essence of power, cooperation, and past grievances. With each moment, the tension builds. Who will emerge victorious from this war of words? 5 minutes ago, everything on Earth changed forever. In a tense arena, Sergei Lavrov found himself facing George Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the weight of unspoken words and dire consequences. As Lavrov locked eyes with Meloni, it felt like the weight of centuries bore down upon them, and the world held its breath, waiting for the upcoming clash. The aftermath of utter destruction lingered in the air, transforming the hall into a battleground of ideologies. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a confrontation where every word mattered. The hall, constructed not merely from concrete but from a collective history, exuded mixed sentiments. Diplomats, security, and a cacophony of sense enveloped them, a rich reminder of the complexities woven into international relations. Lavrov, donned in his impeccable black suit, sat with an aura of calmness that belied the turmoil surrounding him. He had been through storms before, each one leaving an indelible mark on diplomacy. Across from him, Meloni radiated confidence, her white attire gleaming in a spotlight that felt too bright for the underlying tension. She stood ready to challenge the very foundation of Lavrov's legacy, her voice a piercing arrow aimed straight at its target. "We express gratitude to the United States for their unyielding resolve," she declared, her words resonating through the hall like the tolling of a bell. Applause erupted, reverberating with a sense of unity. But what did this really mean? Was Europe casting aside the weight of the past or merely stepping into the unknown? Meloni continued. "Europe will not exist in your shadow anymore." The silence that followed felt like a provocation, a key that unlocked a Pandora's box of historical grievances. And then it was Lavrov's turn. He rose, each step deliberate. The whispers of history wrapped around him like a cloak. His voice emerged, dense and unwavering. "Under the framework of the International Energy Agency, your gas dependence has surged," he reminded. His words echoed grim truths, painting a stark picture of Europe's energy struggles. Photos of empty supermarkets flashed on the screen, stark realities stark against Meloni's vibrant rhetoric. Each image, each number, a thunderous clap that dispelled any lingering doubt about the realities being faced. As Lavrov eloquently detailed the economic fallout, the assembly felt the tangible weight of history pressing down upon them. "You closed the doors," he remarked, each word carefully placed as if fitting glass pieces into a larger puzzle. "You think of freedom, yet you've shackled your own people," he insinuated, provoking a hush so deep it felt like the walls themselves were listening. The narrative twisted like a labyrinth, revealing how easily ideals could spiral into deceit. Each moment felt like a flashback to their shared past, a shared pain, and the memories flooded back. Factory closures echoed in the empty streets of Milan, once brimming with life, now filled with ghosts of a thriving economy. Lavrov's eyes glistened with the weight of truth. "You choose what to remember," he challenged, his steadfast demeanor contrasting Meloni's whitewashed narrative. And as he turned away, the shock lingered in the air. Meloni stood poised, yet uncertainty flickered in her gaze. It was clear, this battle of words was far from over. How could she respond to such stark revelations? The stakes had never been higher, and the world would be watching, ready to judge who would emerge victorious in this high-stakes diplomatic duel. In a world shattered just moments ago, an unseen battle of minds and power begins between two formidable leaders. Sergei Lavrov, the stoic Russian diplomat, stands at the crossroads of history. Across from him sits Giorgia Meloni, Italy's prime minister, clad in a stark white jacket, a striking contrast against the clash of ideologies unfolding beneath the oppressive glare of the hall's lights. She issues a challenge cloaked in confidence, proclaiming Europe's new independence from the shadows of the past. But Lavrov is unyielding, an iron wall of silent resolve. He listens. He studies the room, aware of every breath, every fleeting glance exchanged in the air thick with tension. What could he possibly say to counter such brazen declarations? As she rattles off figures and accolades for a renewed Europe, he knows the war of words is just beginning. A chill settles in the air as his presence casts a long shadow, echoing the history and pain of bygone eras. The hall hangs onto every word, only to be broken by the audacity of Lavrov's eventual retort. "Your independence is a veneer," he begins, his voice low yet resonant. "You talk of freedom, but what price does that come at?" The silence is palpable, thickening as he draws on the memories of past struggles. The feeling in the room shifts, an undercurrent of discomfort seeping through the applause that follows Meloni's proclamations. Could the truth he carries counter the manufactured bravado? As Lavrov continues, he projects images of despair, empty supermarkets, cold streets, and the stark faces of those affected by the turmoil thrust upon them. You may think you've severed ties, he asserts, but you are tethered to the very fabric of a history that binds us. Your people are paying the price for misguided policies. He watches as discomfort dances across the faces around him, the initial certainty now marred by doubt. Just when the tide seems in his favor, he rips open another wound. You speak of culture. Yet you choke it in silence. His words slice through the room like a sharp blade. You're not just separating from us, you're isolating your own identity. He leans forward, intensity emanating from every pore. The stakes are higher than mere politics, they involve the very soul of nations. With every proclamation and pointed fact, questions arise amidst the audience. Will they choose to hear? Will they recognize the scars left by choices made? In this battle of rhetoric, Lavrov's calm demeanor conceals the storm brewing within, creating a paradox that no one can ignore. As he stands firm, the emotional gravity of every truth he reveals leaves an undeniable imprint. In a world veiled in division, the question remains, who will ultimately be defined by their choices? Will the shroud of isolation be lifted, or will it continue to cloak a narrative spun by fear? The answers lie within each listener, beckoning them to confront the hard truths of their own existence as the battle unfurls. And in the haunting silence that follows, the stage is set for the final confrontation yet to come. In a world where the power dynamics of nations can shift in a moment, one figure stands at the epicenter, Sergei Lavrov. Just 5 minutes ago, the world was shattered. Amidst the chaos, Lavrov, once standing in the shadows of history, now faces his opponent, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. Unbeknownst to them, this confrontation will reverberate throughout the globe. As Lavrov directed a calm and unyielding gaze towards Meloni, the atmosphere was palpable. A dense silence hung like smoke after a storm. The stakes were at their peak, with each political player aware of the unpredictable precipice upon which they stood. The halls were not merely filled with delegates and security, they buzzed with the unspoken tension of conflicting ideologies and destinies. Meloni stood confidently, clad in a crisp white suit that shone against the backdrop of an anxious world, akin to a freshly laundered flag. Her expression, though determined, masked uncertainty. The air crackled as she boldly declared that Europe would no longer operate under the shadow of the past. This moment, soaked in poignancy, begged the question, is Europe prepared to break free of historical ties that haunt its decisions? As the audience erupted with applause, Lavrov remained unmoved, a stone statue amidst the storm. His voice finally sliced through the noise, density like snow falling silently, encapsulating everything. Under our shadow, you felt warmth, but you must now face the chill. The room held its breath as Lavrov presented unyielding facts. In a world teetering on the edge of economic collapse due to gas dependencies, he flashed stark statistics on the screen, the purchasing power dwindling in Europe while their self-imposed isolation grew by leaps and bounds. It was a game of chess, but who would checkmate first? The tension mounted further as Lavrov divulged the haunting reality that many European cities were now struggling with economic hardship. Images flashed of empty supermarkets and desperate attempts to access cash. Every visual he offered resonated with a chilling weight, igniting sparks of fear where hope once flourished. He posed the frightening question, is this the freedom you hoped for? Yet, amidst this rhetorical battle, Meloni fired back, reaffirming her stance that Europe would advance without Russia. The stakes had never felt higher. Could Lavrov reclaim his footing, or would the tides irrevocably shift against him? Lavrov, standing tall, countered, we build bridges where you erect walls. The room trembled with the tension of unspoken truths. With the audience caught in this duel of ideas, Lavrov's gaze bore into Meloni's, a clash of conviction that promised a revelation. Would this conference result in peace, or might it awaken dormant conflicts as the world holds its breath for the next move? The stage is set, the lines are drawn. Only time will reveal whether diplomacy can temper the storm, or if a deeper rift threatens the very fabric of international unity. Amidst the ruins of an obliterated world, a defiant dialogue unfolds. Sergei Lavrov stands firm, channeling the weight of history as he faces off against Giorgia Meloni, the Italian Prime Minister. The air is thick with tension, each moment pregnant with consequence. Can diplomacy hold the shattered pieces of nations together? Or will it splinter under the weight of egos? Just moments prior, Lavrov had been a silent observer, rooted in the solemn architecture of a glass hall. a place where the pulse of power thrummed just beneath the surface. He was a shadow of a man molded by years of political strife, observing the challengers with the detachment of a seasoned tactician. Against him, Meloni, clad in pristine attire, radiated confidence. But beneath the crisp facade, turmoil brewed, her resolve like polished steel, yet sharp enough to cut. She steeled her voice for the oncoming battle. The hall resonated with applause as Meloni sought to diminish Lavrov's influence. No longer, she proclaimed, will Europe live under your shadow. Her words, laced with conviction, echoed off the marble walls, igniting a spark among the attendees. But could she truly sever ties entrenched in decades of history? The silence that followed bore the weight of expectation. Lavrov remained unyielding, unfazed by the political storm. You think this freedom comes without a price, he countered, his voice steady, each word a calculated strike. He revealed stark statistics, a stark tableau of consequences: 18% rise in energy dependence, rising costs for the citizens of Europe. Images of near-empty stores flashed on screen. Haunting reminders of the economic despair unfurling beneath their feet. Do they understand what collapse really means? He posed, unleashing a potent silence as reality dawned. The atmosphere thickened, each heartbeat echoing like thunder. Lavrov was not merely spitting facts, he was laying bare the truth. The power dynamic was shifting, and with every syllable, he pulled at the fragile threads of their unity. You chose to forget, but that doesn't erase our history together. His gaze swept the room as a chill lingered in the air. The stakes escalated. Building walls isn't progress, he declared, unleashing memories of cooperation, of shared struggles that once forged alliances. The stark contrast of black and white photographs adorned the screen, tears and triumphs woven into the fabric of nations. A chilling reminder: do you remember the cost of forgetting? In an unexpected twist, Meloni faltered. The facade of unwavering confidence began to crack. Was this dialogue really a negotiation? Or a reckoning? She knew this moment was pivotal, one where the weight of history could tip the scales. Europe does not need you, she shot back, a challenge marred by uncertainty. Yet Lavrov's steadiness clamored louder, echoing essentially, we are not your enemies, we are your truth. With both leaders poised at the precipice of their narratives, voices rose, subtle yet charged with potential consequence. You fear what you don't understand, Lavrov pierced. When you confront your past, you will find the path forward is not paved with disregard, but with respect. Silence ensued. The kind that breeds reflection, as history hung palpably in the air. Caught in a bewitching web of rhetoric, the summit marked not the end of a dialogue, but the threshold of a transformative confrontation, one that transcended borders, ideology, and the way foreign relations should be. Far from a conventional conclusion, it was a challenge, an invitation to remember and recognize the shared journey ahead. As the gathering dissolved, the speeches morphed into echoes of distant voices, suggesting the deeper resonance of a conflict still ongoing. Would they pass through this crucible, or would the past confine them? Only time would tell, but for now, the reverberations of truth and consequence lingered unforgettable and undeniable. 5 minutes ago, it felt like the end of the world. The air was thick with tension as Sergei Lavrov faced off against Giorgia Meloni. In that moment, Lavrov transformed from just a diplomat into a figure of history, someone who carried the weight of an entire nation. He gazed intensely, caught in a game where the stakes were higher than they had ever been. With the world silent and expectations cranked to maximum, he made his presence felt. The glass-walled auditorium reflected not only the political elite but a cacophony of scents, a mix of sweat, polish, and the faint odor of anxiety. He sat there, cloaked in a black suit, embodying the essence of a man who had witnessed the fractures of political alliances. Across from him, Meloni was a vision of stark contrast in her crisp white blazer, almost too pristine for the rawness of the debate. It was as if she wore Italy's fresh aspirations on her sleeve. With each word, she aimed straight for Lavrov, declaring Europe's independence from his shadow. The applause echoed as if the crowd were sealing her fate in their applause. The old ways are over, she proclaimed, wielding her voice as both weapon and shield. The pause that followed resonated like a drumbeat of impending conflict. As the air grew heavy, a brilliant interplay of rhetoric unfolded. Under your regime, dependency has grown, Lavrov countered, laying out the stark realities of economic statistics. It dawned on the audience, their dependence had swelled, a truth they could no longer ignore. He painted dark images with words. detailing empty supermarkets and the sacrifices being made in the name of freedom. "You've traded your independence for warmth," he warned, and the weight of his claims fell over the room like a shroud. But then came the unexpected twist. Lavrov leaned into the audience, his voice steady yet laden with pressure. "You've built walls while we've sought to build bridges," he declared, a final glimmer of hope tinged with reproach. The visuals on the screen morphed into stark historical realities, ghosts of a past where cooperation once thrived. Each photograph was a visceral reminder of unity lost. The chilling silence that followed felt as heavy as a winter's night. Lavrov stood tall, a sentinel of his country, challenging the very foundation of Maloney's rhetoric. Just as it seemed he might back down, he launched into the most provocative revelation yet. "What if I told you that Europe's supposed strength has come at a cost you refuse to see?" He let the silence deepen, allowing the weight of his accusations to saturate the air. The emotional fabric of the debate was thickening. The audience, riveted, reeled at the implications. This was not merely a clash of opinions, it was a confrontation of ideologies, a dance of fate that transpired before their very eyes. In the heart of the exchange, what became painfully clear was that this was not an ordinary diplomatic meeting. It was a reckoning, and Lavrov's concluding remarks strummed through the room like the final strokes of a painter's brush, leaving the canvas incomplete. "We do not sell our values, they are not for export," he said. And with that, the atmosphere shifted. As the summit teetered on the brink of conclusion, an eerie stillness enveloped the hall. It wasn't just about winners and losers, it was about a profound honesty that was rarely voiced in those environments. As the cameras faded, one question lingered, echoing in the minds of all present: when will history finally learn? No one left their seats, frozen in a moment that felt like a pause in time, a moment of reflection instead of reaction. It was a silent promise that diplomacy might not always spell victory or defeat, but rather the act of listening to the voice of the past and the cries of the present. In the end, as discussions of energy and trade swirled around them, a flicker of hope emerged. Perhaps real dialogue could reshape futures. But would anyone heed the call?